September 2nd, 1666. London is sleeping. But under the floorboards of a small bakery on Pudding Lane, a killer is waking up. In less than an hour, a spark will become a flame. In less than a day, the flame will become an inferno. And in 4 days, the medieval city of London, a city that had stood for 1,000 years, will be wiped off the map. This isn't just a story about fire. It is a story about hubris, incompetence, and the terrifying power of nature. Welcome to ChronoWorld. Today, we step into the ashes of the Great Fire. To understand the disaster, we must first understand the city. In 1666, London was a death trap. Imagine a city built almost entirely of wood and pitch. The streets were narrow, dark, and twisting. Houses were built with jetties' upper floors that stuck out over the street, so close that you could shake hands with your neighbor from the bedroom window across the road. It had been a violently hot summer. A drought had turned the wooden timbers bone dry. The city was a forest of kindling, waiting for a match. And to make matters worse, the city was just recovering from the Great Plague. The warehouses by the River Thames were packed with combustible goods: oil, spirits, tallow, coal, and hay. London was not just a city, it was a bomb waiting to go off. The bomb went off at 1 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Thomas Farriner, the King's baker, went to bed in his shop on Pudding Lane. He claimed he had put out the fire in his ovens. He was wrong. A stray ember fell onto a pile of dry twigs nearby. By 2 a.m., the house was full of smoke. Farriner and his daughter, trapped upstairs, managed to climb out a window onto a neighbor's roof. But their maid was too terrified to cross the gap. She became the fire's first victim. The fire quickly consumed the bakery and jumped to the Star Inn next door. The chaos had begun. In 1666, there was no fire brigade. Firefighting was done by citizens with leather buckets and firehooks to pull down burning houses. When the fire started spreading, the constables summoned the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth. His reaction is now legendary for all the wrong reasons. He looked at the burning houses, unimpressed, and famously said, "Pish. A woman might piss it out." He refused to order the demolition of houses to create a firebreak. Fearing the cost of rebuilding, he went back to bed. That decision doomed London. By the time he woke up, the fire was a firestorm. Welcome back to our series on the Great Fire of London. When we left off, a small fire in a baker's shop had begun its deadly march. Now, in part 2, we witness the fall of the greatest city in the world. By Monday morning, London was no longer a city. It was a furnace. The fire, which started as a simple accident, had transformed into an unstoppable monster. A powerful gale-force wind roared in from the east, acting like a giant bellows, fanning the flames and pushing them with incredible speed deeper into the heart of the capital. The blaze leaped across entire streets, devouring whole neighborhoods in mere minutes. The heat was so suffocatingly intense that houses on the opposite side of the road would suddenly burst into flames before the fire even touched them, ignited solely by the waves of thermal radiation. Absolute panic gripped the population. The narrow, winding streets became hopelessly clogged with a terrified mass of humanity, each person desperately trying to save what little they could of their lives. Carts overloaded with furniture and personal treasures created impossible traffic jams. Down at the river, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The Thames was choked with a flotilla of boats, rafts, and barges, all piled high with anything that could be carried. Furniture, priceless musical instruments, and frightened crying children, their faces lit by the terrifying orange glow. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys watched this nightmare unfold from a boat on the water. He later wrote with heartbreaking clarity that he saw the fire as one entire arch of fire from this to the other side of the bridge, and in a bow up the hill for an arch of above a mile long. It made me weep to see it. The fire, in its indiscriminate fury, showed no mercy to the rich and powerful. It swept through Lombard Street, the very heart of the British Empire's financial system. The Royal Exchange, that magnificent symbol of London's commercial might and global reach, was swallowed whole by the inferno. Stone statues of England's ancient kings, which had stood for centuries, toppled from their high perches and shattered on the burning pavement below. The bankers and merchants, who just a day before had considered themselves masters of the universe, were now reduced to refugees, fleeing for their lives with whatever gold they could cram into their pockets. The city's wealth, built over generations, was turning to ash. But the greatest, most symbolic tragedy was yet to come. Old St. Paul's Cathedral was the spiritual heart of London. It was a colossal Gothic masterpiece, built of thick stone with impossibly high walls. To the citizens of London, it was more than a church. It was a fortress of God, a sanctuary they believed was truly invincible. They were certain that the consecrated ground itself would repel the flames. In this desperate hope, booksellers from around the city moved their entire stocks, thousands of priceless volumes, to the cathedral's deep stone crypts for safekeeping. Families dragged their most precious furniture and heirlooms inside the vast nave, believing it was the one place the fire could not touch. They were tragically, devastatingly wrong. In a cruel twist of fate, the cathedral was undergoing renovations at the time, and was surrounded by a web of wooden scaffolding. On Tuesday night, a stray spark was all it took. The scaffolding caught fire, and the flames, like fiery serpents, climbed the stone walls and ignited the massive timber beams of the roof. The interior of the great church became a sealed oven. The millions of pounds worth of books stored in the crypts weren't safe. They became fuel, feeding the fire from within and turning the sacred space into a raging kill. Then, a horror straight from a medieval nightmare unfolded. The roof of St. Paul's was covered in acres and acres of heavy lead sheeting. The heat inside the cathedral became so extreme-reaching, over 1,000 degrees Celsius, that the massive lead roof began to melt. Eyewitnesses described an apocalyptic sight: a glittering silver river of molten lead pouring down the sides of the cathedral, cascading from the mouths of gargoyles and streaming down the streets like volcanic lava. It blocked all escape routes and turned the very pavement red-hot, so that no horse or man could dare to tread upon it. With a final thunderous roar that was heard for miles, the weakened pillars gave way, and the great cathedral, the pride of London, collapsed in on itself, a monumental tomb of stone and fire. With the city's Lord Mayor, seemingly paralyzed by indecision and the situation spiraling into complete anarchy, King Charles II finally took direct command. Casting aside all concerns for his own royal safety, he rode his horse directly into the burning chaos. He and his brother, James, the Duke of York, personally began organizing and commanding the bucket brigades, working alongside their subjects in the smoke and heat. But they quickly realized that throwing buckets of water on this hellstorm was like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble. They needed to starve the beast. In a desperate final gamble, the king gave a shocking order: use the Navy's gunpowder to blow up entire blocks of houses, creating wide fire breaks, empty spaces that the fire could not cross. It was a brutal, destructive strategy, but it was their only hope. A desperate race against time had begun. Stay with us. In the final part, we'll see if this desperate plan worked, and witness the dawn of a new London rising from the ash. By Wednesday evening, September 5th, the gale force winds that had fanned the flames finally died down. The king's desperate plan to blow up houses with gunpowder had created effective fire breaks. The roar of the fire was replaced by an eerie silence. London was gone. In just 4 days, 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and the magnificent St. Paul's Cathedral had been reduced to ash. 80% of the city was destroyed. 100,000 people were suddenly homeless. They camped in the fields just outside the old city walls, huddled together in makeshift tents, surrounded by the few precious possessions they had managed to save. They were refugees in their own capital. For days, the ground remained hot to the touch. For weeks, the smell of burnt wood and melted lead hung heavy in the air over England. But as the initial shock wore off, a new, powerful emotion began to take over. Anger. The citizens refused to believe this devastation was a simple accident. It had to be a plot. England was at war with both the Dutch and the French, and paranoia ran wild. Mobs roamed the streets, attacking anyone who looked foreign. They needed someone to blame, and they found him. Enter Robert Hubert, a simple-minded French watchmaker. Hubert confessed to starting the fire. He claimed he had thrown a fireball through the window of the bakery on Pudding Lane, but his story made no sense. He wasn't even in London when the fire started. He arrived 2 days later, but the court didn't seem to care about the facts. They wanted a villain. They needed a scapegoat for a city's own negligence. Robert Hubert was hanged at Tyburn. It was only years later that the captain of the ship he arrived on confirmed that Hubert was still at sea when the fire began. An innocent man died for a baker's mistake. With the old city cleared to its foundations, King Charles II saw a unique opportunity. He asked the brilliant Sir Christopher Wren to rebuild London. Wren envisioned a new London to rival the grandeur of Paris or Rome, a city of wide straight boulevards, grand public squares, and elegant stone buildings. No more dark, crowded wooden alleyways. But reality quickly got in the way. The landlords, the property owners, wanted their old plots of land back, exactly where they had been before the fire. Wren's grand geometric plan was scrapped. However, the king did issue a new, game-changing decree. All new houses had to be built of brick or stone. Wood was banned. The layout of the medieval streets remained, but the city that rose from the ashes was stronger, cleaner, and finally, fireproof. The crown jewel of this massive reconstruction effort was the new St. Paul's Cathedral. It took Sir Christopher Wren 35 years to build. Its massive, glorious dome dominated the London skyline for centuries, a powerful symbol of resilience. But the fire had one unexpected, almost unbelievable benefit. The intense heat had burned down the filthy, rat-infested slums that had harbored the Great Plague. The fire of 1666 effectively ended the plague of 1665. The fire that destroyed London also saved it. Today, if you stand at the junction of Monument Street and Fish Street Hill, you will see a massive Doric column, known simply as the Monument. It stands exactly 202 feet tall, because it is exactly 202 feet away from the very spot-on Pudding Lane where that first spark fell. It stands as a solemn reminder of the fragility of civilization. London fell, but it rose again, forged in fire. Thank you for watching this 3-part special on ChronoWorld. If you enjoyed this journey through the ashes, please like and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what historical mystery should we uncover next? Until next time,